Morning, everybody. It's great to be here this morning, but as we all know, it's great to be anywhere at the moment. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Galt from Education Scotland. I'm one of the Community Learning and Development Officers in our West Regional team, and it's lovely to see so many familiar faces in the room today and meet a few new ones as well. Our presentations today, we're going to hear from some brilliant examples of practice, but we did think it might be useful just to touch base on some of the policy context before we got to that point. I'm very aware that most of the stuff I'm going to say here, everybody in the room will know most or all of it as good as me, if not better than me, but we thought it'd be useful just to remind ourselves of some of the key messages to help us with our discussions today. Like Ruth, I was one of the people that was in the room here 2.5 years ago. I think it was January, end of January 2020, when we were discussing things. This is the context we're in at the moment. Again, I'm not going to labour the point, but we know some of these are the factors that families and communities are dealing with every day in schools and in the communities that we're working in. Particularly, I suppose that we know that so much of the focus of policy is about addressing poverty and disadvantage, both for schools and for community learning and development. And we know that child poverty in this country is going up. It's not going down as it was a few years ago, and that was before the pandemic hit and the impacts of that and the cost of living crisis that's having an impact in terms of fuel and food and so on. So yes, I look back at my notes from the session back in January 2020 because I was trying to remember what was it that we talked about. I remember it being a really positive session, and I remember people going away thinking, yeah, there's lots that we can do in terms of improving collaboration and joint working between community learning and development and schools across the West region. The kind of things that were being discussed in the groups, people were recognising that community learning and development offer varies across the different authorities. What you might call a core offer, if you like, looks different in different parts of the region. There was maybe some frustrations about maybe when people are able to access or not able to access services that they were looking for. But we knew that there were different contexts and different pressures on services and CLD partnerships in each authority. There was definitely a message coming out about school leaders wanting to know more about what was available in their area. And again, we know that knowledge will vary across area, but that was definitely one of the messages there. There was quite a bit of talk, certainly the groups I was in, about the idea of kind of menus of offers. And I think the discussion was about maybe getting beyond that idea of it's just a menu that you tick in terms of things to access, but getting something that's a starting point for joint planning. We heard lots of great examples where schools were using their PEF money to support families and communities. And the kind of output from that session was looking at some small projects, test to change projects in each area to go away and look at. Most of those things were about either raising awareness of CLD opportunities in the area or looking at improving joint planning. It was about 6 weeks before lockdown, so most of those small change initiatives I know certainly took a back seat because there were obviously much bigger concerns there for everybody. But interesting just to touch base, as Ruth has said, in terms of what we were looking at. I agree. I think the world looks different to what it looked like in January 2020, and we've learned a lot. But certainly what's true in terms of policy and in terms of what we know in practice is that schools can't solve poverty-related attainment on their own, and that community learning and development's got a key contribution to make. I'm not going to labour this point because I'm looking around the room and I'm guessing most people know this stuff already. When we talk about community learning and development, we're talking about a diverse workforce. We're talking about practitioners that work both within your local authorities, but also in other public sector organisations and in the voluntary sector. We're talking about people that do youth work. We're talking about adult educators, family learning workers, community development workers, a range of practitioners that are out there. The job titles might vary, but there is a set of national common competencies and values that CLD workers work to, and that's those up there. The messages in terms of community learning and development in national policy, again, these are not new. CLD has a focus on both working with individuals in terms of improving their life chances, and we're talking about learners of all ages, and also about working to build stronger communities. And the key focus there is that targeted CLD activity should be targeted on the most disadvantaged communities. The statutory basis for CLD, and this is probably still fresh in the mind for CLD officers that are in the room, there is a statutory responsibility to work with partners to secure adequate and efficient CLD in each area for those reasons. And the practical output of that is the requirement for 3-year community learning and development plans in each of the local authority areas. Ruth talked about her experience in Inverclyde of community learning and development during the pandemic. And I was saying beforehand, I remember Hugh, the lead in Inverclyde, trying to have discussions at a regional level while he was out and about in a van delivering food to families. So that was a practical role that community learning and development officers and practitioners were taking during the pandemic. That's a slide from the Scottish Government from actually just sort of at the end of the first phase of the pandemic in November 2020, which showed the impact and the changes that were happening in community learning and development. And I suppose emphasising the vital role that practitioners have in supporting learners and communities to rebuild from the pandemic. In November 2020, we probably thought that rebuilding was going to be happening a bit quicker, but you know, the point remains the same. During all the pandemic, your CLD colleagues were involved in reviewing and updating their 3-year CLD plans. And again, I'm guessing a lot of people in the room were involved in that process in their areas. So last autumn, the CLD plans in each of the 8 areas were refreshed and updated. If you haven't seen the CLD plan in your area, you can find it on the National Improvement Hub in Education Scotland. We can give you the link there. But a lot of work done on updating priorities. So those plans are current. They're obviously take account of the context of the pandemic and the need for recovery. Big focus on recovery, obviously, in most of those plans. I'm not going to go through the plans in any great detail, you'll be glad to hear, but it was interesting just to do a quick read through in terms of contributions to attainment agenda more broadly. And I suppose the key message is there's a lot of connection there, that CLD partners are already making contributions, they're already including targets within their plans that are making contributions to the attainment agenda, either through working with young people in terms of their attainment achievement or transitions, working with families and making links between schools and wider learning in their communities. Now, the Scottish Attainment Challenge, I'm aware there are colleagues in the room here that live and breathe this stuff, so I'm moving on to this a bit gingerly. But we know that the Attainment Challenge was refreshed and the new guidance came out at the end of March, along with the new funding model that had come out, as well as some evaluation of progress that had been made so far. I'm not going to take you through what's in the Attainment Challenge because I'm sure most of you know about it, but I suppose some of the key messages there is we know the focus needs to be on poverty and recovery. We know that progress has been made, but it needs to be accelerated. And we know that partnership working is key to making that happen. So there was the overall framework in terms of the SAC, there was a guidance around strategic equity funding, and there was a guidance for pupil equity funding, and there was also the logic model that came out all at the same time. And within that, definitely messages for head teachers in terms of working in partnership, and definitely key messages in terms of linking planning. So it's not just about plans within schools or within education, it's about the impact across all local authority planning, including community learning and development. So again, just emphasising some of those messages, emphasising as well that when we talk about community learning and development, it's not just the public sector or local authority that we're talking about. There's also a key role for third sector partners in that process. I thought that was an interesting quote, and people might have picked that up, that idea that when it comes to how schools make decisions about their pupil equity funding, it isn't just about looking at the data within schools. I think the whole data question is one that might come up in your discussions later on in terms of how within joint planning, how you share data, what data is available. I think it's fair to say from a community learning and development point of view, certainly at a national level, there isn't the same breadth of data available that there is in schools, but that doesn't mean that there isn't data, and that doesn't mean that there isn't useful stuff there that can be form the basis for joint planning. So again, just the emphasis in the pupil equity fund guidance about who the partners are, both with parents and other local authority groups, including community learning and development and third sector and other areas of expertise. The messages are consistent through the different elements of the guidance. So again, that's the guidance for strategic equity funding. When it comes to putting together those plans for using strategic equity funding, there's a need to take to joint plan, and community learning and development are one of the areas that should be involved in that joint planning. I know there's people in the room who were involved putting the SAC Logic Model together. So what was interesting is that when you look at the inputs and the activities, there's a very clear role there for community learning and development. And interesting that some of the activities focus around data sharing as well as partnership agreements and generally joined up working, and how that has an impact across the logic model in terms of achieving the long-term outcomes of the Scottish Attainment Challenge. I was also asked to just briefly say to people that when it comes to community learning and development policy, it's not all about the Scottish Attainment Challenge. There's also a really important new national policy on adult learning that was had a soft launch, I think, last month. The official launch is still to come. I think it's the end of June. If anybody's interested, there's an online event coming up for that. But we thought it was relevant to talk about it today because one of the roles that CLD can play is offering learning pathways for parents, for families. That can have we know that has an impact on young people's learning, but it also has an impact on those adults' learning and the pathways for them into further learning or employment. So an important part of the picture. So when we talk about adult learning and the kind of pathways that it can support, those are the kind of things that we talk about. And I've just picked one of the themes in the new strategy which seemed relevant, which is about increasing the availability and support for family learning. So there very much is a link within that national strategy between work with schools, with families and pathways into broader adult learning. Oh, and that's my last slide. So that was just a little run through of some of the policy key messages, and hopefully that will be useful for our discussion later on today.